A wounded ranger is beaten and tied up in an abandoned house by a group of strangers, left in the cold, in the silence of a harsh winter. And then, through the snow-covered woods, a German shepherd appears, scarred from old battles and tempered by harsh conditions. A creature that should have disappeared at the scent of blood approaches. The dog's next move will break every law of nature and rewrite everything it believes about survival, loyalty, and divine destiny. And if this story touches your heart, subscribe to see more. The morning air over Wind River, Wyoming, was thin and biting, the kind that bit through fur and skin alike, leaving everything still and silvered in frost. Snow blanketed the endless pines, heavy enough to bend their branches but not break them, and the mountains beyond stood like silent sentinels in pale light. It was a place where even time seemed to move slower, as if the cold itself held it hostage. Ryan Walker moved through that frozen quiet like a man half alive, his breath fogging before him, boots crunching over a crust of ice. He was broad-shouldered and lean, the wiry muscle of someone forged by years of endurance rather than vanity. His beard was trimmed but rough, dusted with white at the edges, and deep lines carved down his face like echoes of too many winters and too many memories. His eyes, a hard storm gray, rarely rested. They flicked over the tree line, the snowdrifts, the sky. It wasn't habit anymore. It was instinct, a soldier's mind trapped in a civilian's life. He carried a worn ranger's rifle slung over his shoulder, not for protection, but because empty hands made him uneasy. He'd learned long ago that danger was most comfortable when unseen, when it was the silence between breaths, the pause before a sound that should have been there. Beside him, trotting with easy rhythm, was Max, a 6-year-old German Shepherd K9, trained under the SEAL program's toughest conditions and surviving them with a mix of ferocity and grace. Max's coat was a perfect storm of black and tan, dense and gleaming even under frost. His amber eyes mirrored his handler's vigilance, always watching, always reading the world. A faint scar along his left shoulder told of a bullet wound long ago in Kandahar, the same night Ryan lost his entire team. The bond between man and dog had been forged there, under artillery fire and chaos. It was more than loyalty. It was the silent understanding between two beings who had seen too much and survived out of stubbornness rather than hope. Ryan paused near the ridge, scanning the horizon. The wind was rising, carrying with it the smell of pine resin and distant wood smoke, maybe a hunter's camp, or maybe just memory. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the hollow whistle of air between the trees. For most, it would sound like wind. For him, it still sounded like the aftermath of an explosion, like the screaming vacuum that followed detonation. He rubbed the back of his neck, where the skin still bore faint burn marks from shrapnel. He could almost hear them again, his brothers in arms, laughing, shouting, alive. Then silence. Always silence. When he opened his eyes, Max was watching him, ears perked, tail still. Ryan exhaled softly. "Yeah," he muttered. "I know, boy. Just ghosts." They descended toward the ranger cabin, a small log structure nestled against the slope, smoke rising weakly from its chimney. It was home in the barest sense. A roof, a cot, a few maps, a coffee pot older than his career. Ryan preferred it that way. Clutter made him anxious. The fewer things he owned, the less there was to lose. He pushed the door open and let Max in first. The dog trotted straight to his corner. His bed was an old military duffel stuffed with blankets, and circled twice before lying down. Ryan shrugged off his coat, hung it by the stove, and poured a cup of coffee that tasted of iron and ash. The morning report sat on the table, damp at the edges, his own handwriting scrawled with military precision. Perimeter patrol, West Ridge secure. No sign of trespass. Wolf tracks near river. Clear. He had been writing that same sentence for 3 years. Outside, the wind shifted again, sending snow flurries against the cabin windows. Ryan sat at the table and stared at the map pinned to the wall, a topographic spread of Wind River National Forest. Each red mark on it represented something he had fixed or found: a broken sensor, a missing hiker, a downed tree. It was order, control. And yet, deep down, he knew it was all camouflage. His real war was the one in his head. He thought often of the mission that ended it all: Operation Reaper's Gate. 6 men, 1 K-9 unit. Their objective had been simple: extract a captured informant from an insurgent compound. What came instead was betrayal. Someone leaked their position. The night erupted in fire. He could still feel the desert heat searing through his uniform, hear the radio static dissolving into panic. He remembered dragging his commanding officer through the sand, blood soaking the dust, and the moment the helicopter never came. When it was over, Max had been the only other heartbeat still moving. The Navy called it a strategic misfortune. He called it what it was: a failure. He'd been discharged with honors, medals, and nightmares. The papers said, heroic service. The Mirror said otherwise. Ryan took another sip of coffee, hands trembling slightly despite the warmth. His reflection in the window stared back at him, gray eyes hollowed by years of insomnia. Max lifted his head, sensing the shift in energy, and patted over, placing his heavy paw on Ryan's thigh. The simple touch grounded him more than any therapy session ever had. He scratched behind Max's ear. "You keep me honest, huh?" The dog leaned his head against Ryan's knee, exhaling softly. For a moment, the cabin felt human again. A knock shattered the quiet. Ryan froze, muscles tightening like wire. Few people ever came this far without warning. He set his mug down, motioned for Max to stay, and went to the door. The wind rushed in with the scent of pine and diesel. Standing on the porch was Sarah Callahan, one of the district rangers who occasionally worked nearby. She was in her mid-30s, tall and narrow-framed, with dark auburn hair tied back in a braid that brushed her parka collar. Her cheeks were wind-burned, her eyes the color of moss under rain, sharp, tired, yet kind. Sarah had the calm professionalism of someone who'd spent too many years talking down panicked hikers and drunk hunters. Beneath that calm, though, there was a quiet steel. She'd lost her husband in a snowstorm rescue 2 winters back and carried the weight of that day in every cautious step she took. "Morning, Ryan," she said, breath misting in the cold. "Didn't mean to startle you." He relaxed slightly, opening the door wider. "You didn't." Sarah stepped in, stomping snow off her boots. Max sniffed her hand once, recognized her scent, and retreated to his corner. She smiled faintly. "Still all business, huh?" "Can't blame him," Ryan said, pouring another cup of coffee. "What brings you up here?" "Dispatch picked up a false distress beacon from North Ridge last night. Could be a glitch, could be kids fooling around. Figured you'd know if it was real." Ryan frowned. Beacons shouldn't be transmitting from that sector. They shut those lines last fall. "That's what worries me." She handed him a small tablet with the coordinates flashing in red. "Weather's turning again tonight. If it's faulty, we can ignore it. If it's not," he nodded, "then someone's out there in the storm." Sarah's expression softened as she looked at him. "You don't have to go alone this time, you know." Ryan hesitated. He appreciated her concern. Sarah had always tried to break through his shell, but solitude had become his shield. "I'll take Max. We'll check it before dusk." She studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "You ever gonna let anyone in, Walker?" He looked away, jaw tightening. "Letting people in gets them killed." Sarah's eyes softened with something between understanding and sadness. "That wasn't your fault, Ryan. He didn't answer. She knew when not to press. With a nod, she pulled her hood up. "Just radio me if you find anything." When she was gone, Ryan lingered by the doorway, staring out at the expanse of white. The beacon's coordinates pulsed in his mind like a heartbeat. Something about it itched at him. Too sudden, too coincidental. He turned back to Max, who was already on his feet, tail low, but ready. "Looks like we've got work again, partner." Max barked once, a sharp, confident sound that seemed to cut through the howling wind. Ryan felt a faint smile tug at his lips. It was the first real smile in months. As he packed his gear, rope, radio, flare gun, he caught his reflection again. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper, but for the first time, he didn't look like a ghost. He looked like a man with purpose. Outside, the world was white and merciless, yet in that mercilessness, there was something pure. As Ryan stepped into the storm with Max at his side, the wind howled louder, wrapping around them like the breath of old wars. He didn't know it yet, but that false beacon would lead him straight back into the kind of darkness he thought he had left behind, and toward the beginning of something that might just save him. By mid-afternoon, the storm had already begun to crawl down the mountainside, the wind sharpening into long, whistling blades that sliced through the pine forest. Ryan Walker and Max trudged through the knee-deep snow toward North Ridge, the coordinates Sarah had handed him glowing faintly on his handheld GPS. The screen flickered with static interference, the kind that warned of weather turning deadly. Ryan adjusted his hood, the fur lining crusted with ice, and pressed forward, each breath a plume of frost that vanished into the white blur. The radio at his shoulder crackled but yielded only fragments of sound. The forest had swallowed every signal. He glanced at Max, who moved a few paces ahead, his fur dark against the blinding snow. The German shepherd's gait was sure, tail low, ears pricked forward. Every few minutes the dog stopped, sniffed the air, then resumed his steady march. Max was trained for endurance, but Ryan could see the subtle stiffness in his legs, a reminder of old wounds that even loyalty couldn't numb. He reached down once, brushing the dog's flank as they climbed. "Easy, boy, almost there." The ridge narrowed, flanked by cliffs glazed in ice. Beyond them stretched the frozen basin of Wind River Valley, a ghostly white sea. Somewhere out there, a distress beacon had flared and died. Ryan's instincts told him this wasn't a malfunction. It felt deliberate, too calculated. A half-mile later, they found it. The mangled remains of a snowmobile, its frame twisted around a pine trunk. The machine's red paint was half buried under snow, and beside it, a trail of blood, thin but fresh, leading downhill into the trees. Ryan crouched, fingertips brushing the dark stain. Still warm. Someone had been here within the hour. "Max, search," he ordered softly. The dog lowered his muzzle, nose twitching, and began to follow the scent. They descended the slope slowly, Ryan's rifle ready. The storm's howl grew louder, flinging snow sideways in violent gusts. 10 minutes later, Max stopped near a fallen log, barking once, short and urgent. Ryan followed his gaze and saw the torn edge of a dark green parka sleeve protruding from beneath the snow. He dropped to his knees, digging with gloved hands until the shape of a woman emerged. Her face was pale, lips blue, eyes half open in delirium. "Hey, stay with me," Ryan said, brushing snow from her cheeks. The woman blinked weakly, trying to focus. She looked young, late 20s, with light brown hair matted against her forehead and faint freckles across her nose. A tag on her parka read, "Brooks, E." He recognized the name immediately. Emily Brooks, the biologist stationed at the Upper Research Post. She had arrived 2 months ago from Colorado, known among the staff as quiet but determined, a scientist who preferred field work to offices. Ryan checked her pulse. Weak, but steady. "You're okay. You're safe now." Her voice was barely a whisper. "They took my partner. They—" A shiver cut her words short. "Don't talk," he said, wrapping his thermal blanket around her. "We'll get you out." He clicked his radio, but only static answered. They were too deep in the ridge's shadow for any signal to pass through. He cursed under his breath, scanning for shelter. Then he saw it, smoke faintly rising from beyond the tree line. Too thin to be a campfire, more like an exhaust leak. "Max," he murmured. "Guard." The dog stood alert, eyes following his handler's gaze. Ryan lifted Emily carefully and half-carried her through the snow. As they neared the source of smoke, the outline of a small wooden cabin appeared through the haze, one of the old ranger outposts abandoned after the 1980 fire. Its windows were boarded, its chimney cracked. But the door was ajar. He froze, lowering Emily to the snow. Something wasn't right. The wind shifted, carrying a smell that didn't belong in wilderness, diesel and tobacco. He signaled Max to stay low, then crept toward the doorway. Inside, the dim light flickered from a kerosene lantern hung on a nail. And beside it, voices. Male, rough, careless. "Dump the rest of it by dawn. Miller says the truck's coming through the south trail," one voice muttered. Ryan's pulse slowed. Miller. The name hit like a hammer. Grant Miller had once been his commanding officer during his early SEAL days, a man with charisma and cold precision, square-jawed, sandy-haired, and always too ambitious for his own good. He'd been dishonorably discharged after a corruption inquiry involving stolen equipment, one Ryan had testified in, and now Miller was here, in his forest, smuggling through protected land. He turned to retreat, but his boot brushed against an empty can. It clattered across the floorboards. The voices stopped. A man burst through the door, shotgun raised. He was in his 40s, heavy-set, with a black beard crusted in ice and eyes so pale they almost looked colorless. "Who the hell?" he barked. Ryan moved first. He grabbed the barrel, twisted, slammed his shoulder into the man's chest, sending him sprawling into the snow. Max leapt forward with a snarl, teeth flashing, pinning the stranger by the arm. But before Ryan could recover, another figure stepped from behind the cabin. Grant Miller, exactly as he remembered, but harder, older, with lines etched deep around his mouth and a faint scar cutting across his temple. His parka was military issue, his gloves spotless, his posture commanding. "Stand down, Walker," Miller called, voice calm as ice. "No need to make this messy." Ryan's jaw tightened. "Didn't expect to see you here, Grant." "You always did underestimate ambition," Miller said, lowering his own rifle casually. "You cost me everything once. Career, reputation, freedom. Guess I should thank you. Made me realize there are easier ways to make money." Ryan kept his weapon steady. "You're smuggling wildlife through federal land?" Miller's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Among other things, but we both know the real issue here is that you saw too much. I can't have that." He gestured toward the man on the ground. "Tie him up." The bearded man struggled under Max's grip. Miller's tone sharpened. "Don't hurt the dog. He's valuable stock." Ryan's gut twisted. "You touch him, you won't live to regret it." Miller tilted his head. Still the righteous soldier, always defending the weak, even when it's hopeless. "Tell me, Ryan, how many men died because you hesitated that night in Kandahar?" The words hit like a blade. Ryan's stance faltered for half a second, just long enough. The bearded man kicked upward, wrenching his arm free. Another attacker swung from behind. Ryan turned, parried, struck back, but there were too many. A blow from the rifle butt caught his temple, and the world fractured into white light and falling snow. When he came to, his wrists were bound with rope, his gear stripped away. The cabin was darker now, the lantern turned low. Outside, the storm howled, drowning any sound beyond its walls. Miller stood over him, arms folded, his breath steady. "You always had good instincts," he said softly. "Shame they lead you here." Ryan glared up. "What did you do with her, the biologist?" "She's alive, for now." Miller crouched, his pale eyes glittering. "You'll freeze here by morning. I'll tell the others we found your body in the storm. Tragic accident." He straightened and nodded to his men. "Take the dog. Keep it chained. He's military bred. Could fetch a good price if we train him right." Max growled, teeth bared, pulling against the two men trying to hold him. Ryan strained against the ropes, shouting hoarsely, "Don't touch him!" But a rifle butt struck the side of his face again, and darkness took him. The last thing he heard was Max's snarl fading into the storm. When silence fell, the snow reclaimed the forest. The wind carried no trace of struggle, only the distant, lonely echo of a dog's howl swallowed by the night. The storm was now a living thing, howling, grinding, bending the forest under its rage. Wind tore through the trees with the voice of 1,000 ghosts, and snow came not as gentle flakes, but as shards of frozen glass, cutting visibility to nothing. Somewhere below the ridge, beneath that monstrous storm, Max moved like a shadow of muscle and instinct. The German shepherd's thick coat, black fading into tan, was coated in ice, but his eyes, amber and sharp as flint, remained steady. He had been left near the trailhead hours before when Ryan went deeper into the ridge to investigate the signal. But when the scent reached him, metallic, sharp, and achingly familiar, his world narrowed to one purpose: find his handler. The blizzard tried to erase every trace, burying scent beneath layers of snow, but Max had hunted insurgents through sandstorms and smoke before. He knew how to follow fear, how to find pain. His breath came in heavy bursts, steaming in the dark as he pressed his nose to the wind. Beneath the tang of pine sap and diesel fumes, he caught it again. Ryan's scent, faint but persistent, mingled with blood. He broke into a run. His paws sank deep, snow exploding beneath him, his movements tireless and precise. Somewhere ahead, lightning flashed pale blue behind the storm clouds, and for an instant the world turned white. Max didn't hesitate. He found the first clue near a fallen branch, a torn scrap of green fabric, Ryan's parka. The second came moments later, boot prints, half filled with drifting snow, leading toward the derelict cabin. The smell of men, oil, tobacco, gunmetal, hit his nose like poison. His ears flattened. He slowed, lowering himself until his belly brushed the ground, every instinct sharpened, every muscle tuned for silence. Through the howling wind, he heard faint voices, muffled, distorted, but human. He crept closer, nostrils flaring. The scent of his master was inside that cabin, heavy with pain and fear. And there another, Emily's faint, unfamiliar scent, mixed with the harsh tones of strangers. The door was half open, rattling against its hinge. Max edged forward, his paws making no sound on the snow. He peeked through the gap. Inside, Ryan was tied to a support beam, head slumped forward, blood darkening his temple. Two men guarded him. One was the bearded brute from earlier, broad and ugly, his coat smeared with mud. The other, lean and wiry, with a long scar slicing across his cheek. Both were armed, rifles slung carelessly, arrogance in their posture. And then there was Grant Miller. He sat near the stove, the only calm figure in the chaos, cleaning his pistol with surgical precision. His sandy hair was damp, his blue eyes cold and meticulous, the look of a man who had traded morality for control. The firelight deepened the lines of his face, making him look carved from ice. "Dump the woman at dawn," Miller said evenly, not looking up. "We don't need her."
Alive. The biologist's just a witness. The bearded man grunted. "And Walker?" Miller paused, sliding the pistol's magazine back in with a click. "Let the snow handle him. That way, no one has to pull the trigger." Max didn't understand the words, but the tone, The threat ignited something primal. His tail stiffened, breath steadying. He crouched lower, waiting for movement. The moment one man turned away to fetch fuel from a crate, Max lunged. The door slammed open with the fury of the storm. Snow blasted into the cabin as Max launched himself through the threshold. His teeth sank into the bearded man's wrist before the man could raise his gun. The weapon discharged once, the shot burying itself in the ceiling. Max twisted, yanking down with the weight of his body until bones snapped. The man screamed. The other guard swung his rifle around, but Max was faster. He released, pivoted, and leapt for the man's chest, knocking him backward into the stove. Metal clanged, fire scattered. In the confusion, Miller stood, eyes narrowing, fury contained within composure. He raised his pistol and fired. The bullet grazed Max's flank, ripping fur and skin, but the dog didn't slow. He bounded toward Ryan, teeth working at the ropes binding his wrists. The fibers shredded under pressure. Ryan stirred, dazed but alive. "Max," he croaked, disbelief cutting through exhaustion. Another shot. Sparks burst from the beam above. Max growled, positioning himself between Ryan and Miller. Ryan ripped the last knot free, staggered to his feet, and lunged for the fallen guard's rifle. His head swam, the world tilting in and out of focus. He fired once. Miller ducked behind the table, the bullet splintering wood. "Max! Out!" Ryan shouted. The dog obeyed instantly, darting through the doorway and into the storm. Ryan followed, stumbling into the blinding snow. Behind them, Miller cursed and reloaded. They ran until the cabin's shadow disappeared. The blizzard swallowed all sound, covering their tracks faster than they could make them. Ryan's vision blurred. Every step felt heavier than the last. His lungs burned, throat raw from the cold. "We have to keep moving," he gasped, but his body betrayed him. His knees buckled. Max circled back, whining, nudging Ryan's shoulder with his nose. The man fell to one side, collapsing into the snow. For a moment, the storm was the only heartbeat. Then Max began to dig, clawing through the snow, dragging at Ryan's sleeve with his teeth, pulling him inch by inch toward a rocky outcrop visible through the storm. The opening beneath the rocks was small, a shallow cave shaped by time and water. Max squeezed inside first, then returned, gripping Ryan's coat collar and hauling him in with raw determination. Once sheltered from the wind, he pressed his body against Ryan's, thick fur warming the man's chilled skin. Ryan drifted in and out of consciousness. His mind blurred between the cave and another memory, another night, years ago, under a different sky. He saw sand instead of snow, fire instead of frost. The convoy had been ambushed outside Kandahar. Flames swallowed the trucks. Bullets tore through the dust. Ryan remembered shouting commands, the crack of gunfire, and the cry of a wounded man calling for help. Max had been there too, smaller then, leaner, eyes blazing with courage. When an explosion buried Ryan under debris, it was Max who dug him out, teeth bleeding, paws raw, refusing to stop. He remembered the sound of rotors above, the rescue helicopter arriving too late for most, and the way Max had lain beside him on the stretcher, refusing to move until he felt Ryan's hand again. Now, in the frozen darkness, Ryan felt that same warmth, soft fur under his fingers, the rhythm of breathing that wasn't his own. He whispered hoarsely, "You saved me again, partner." Max didn't move, only pressed closer, head resting against Ryan's chest. His wound bled lightly against the snow, staining it a dull pink. Outside, the wind screamed, but the cave stayed still. Hours passed in fragments of dream and pain. Ryan's mind wandered between guilt and gratitude. He saw faces, his fallen teammates, the betrayal that had cost them their lives, and Miller's cold eyes watching it all crumble. Somewhere in that haze, he made a promise to himself. He wouldn't run anymore. When dawn finally broke, the storm weakened, replaced by a muted sky, the color of steel.
Ryan stirred, blinking through the frost crusted on his lashes. Max lifted his head, tail thumping weakly. "We're not done," Ryan murmured. He tore a strip of cloth from his sleeve and pressed it against the dog's wound, wrapping it tight. "You and me, we finish this together." Max gave a low, soft whine. Acknowledgement, trust, something deeper than obedience. Outside, somewhere across the valley, the faint sound of an engine echoed, the smugglers moving again. Ryan pushed himself upright, leaning against the cave wall. Pain radiated through his ribs, but his eyes had hardened. He wasn't the same broken ranger who'd sought peace in solitude. The soldier in him was awake again. He looked at Max. "Let's find her," he said. "Let's bring Emily home." The dog rose, muscles coiled, ready. Together, they stepped out into the snow, leaving the cave behind, a dark womb that had birthed survival once more. The storm had spent its fury, but what lay ahead would be colder still. The gray dawn crept over the ridge, smearing the sky in cold silver. The storm had weakened, leaving behind a world sculpted by ice. Trees bowing under white weight, the valley below drowned in silence. Ryan Walker stood outside the cave, his breath fogging, pain lancing through his shoulder with every heartbeat. The bandage he'd tied around his ribs was soaked through with melted snow, but he ignored it. Max stood beside him, limping slightly, his side wrapped in a makeshift cloth from Ryan's torn sleeve. The German shepherd's eyes, however, were alert, fixed on the faint line of smoke curling in the distance. Ryan crouched, brushing snow off the ground until he found them. Boot prints, wide and deep, leading toward the basin. He touched the frozen imprint, his jaw tightening. "They're moving cargo," he muttered. Max sniffed the trail, ears pricking forward. "Let's end this, partner." They began their descent. The sun, still hidden behind clouds, painted everything in muted gray. Ryan moved carefully, avoiding open ground. Every creak of ice, every rustle of pine needles put him on edge. The silence reminded him too much of recon patrols in Helmand Province, where the quiet always came before the explosion. 2 hours later, they reached the valley floor where the tracks split. One path led toward a riverbank, the other toward an old lumber road. Ryan squinted. A small structure stood there, half collapsed and surrounded by logging debris. Through the snow haze, he saw faint movement near the doorway. A warehouse, probably left from the 1970s logging operations, a perfect hideout. Ryan raised his binoculars. 2 guards stood near the entrance, their breath pluming in the cold. One was the bearded man Max had injured earlier, now with his arm bound and expression twisted in rage. The other was new, tall, thin, with a blonde goatee and pale eyes that darted restlessly. He wore a mismatched hunting jacket and carried a sawed-off shotgun. Ryan studied the scene with a soldier's patience, analyzing angles, distances, and timing. His mind flickered back to old training drills, room clearing, hostage extractions, rapid entry tactics. He felt that muscle memory spark again, the cold calm that came before violence. He turned to Max. "We go quiet. 1 bark if you spot anyone else." Max tilted his head, then crouched low, ready. They circled wide, approaching from the rear. The snow muffled everything except their breathing. Near the warehouse wall, Ryan paused, placing his hand against the rotted wood. Inside, faint voices echoed, Miller's unmistakably controlled and cutting. "But the transport leaves at noon," Miller said. "Get her ready." A woman's voice followed, weak but defiant. "You'll never get away with this. Emily Brooks." Ryan's pulse quickened. He pictured her face as he'd last seen it, pale under frost, stubborn fire in her brown eyes. She was brave, he thought, the kind of person who refused to give up even when logic said she should. He respected that. A sudden laugh from inside broke his thought. Miller's. I already have. By the time the storm clears, no one will remember a missing scientist. Ryan's grip tightened on his rifle. He nodded to Max. The dog crept toward the front, silent as smoke. Ryan moved to the side window, its glass cracked and frosted. Through the gap, he saw Emily tied to a chair near the far wall, a bruise on her cheek, but her chin lifted in defiance. Miller stood over her, holding a pistol loosely, his expression calm. Two more men paced nearby, carrying crates stamped with false forestry seals. Ryan took a breath, remembering Sarah's voice from days before. "You don't have to go alone this time." He almost smiled at the irony. Then he mouthed the word to Max. "Now." Max shot out from behind a snowdrift, barking loud and fierce. The guards at the entrance whirled. The bearded man shouted, "It's the damn dog!" and raised his rifle. Too slow. Max hit him full in the chest, knocking him backward into the snow, jaws locking on his uninjured arm. The blond guard swung his shotgun, but Ryan was already there, sliding through the side door. He grabbed the man by the collar and slammed him into the wall, disarming him in one clean motion. Inside, chaos erupted. Miller spun toward the sound, raising his gun. "Walker!" he snarled. Ryan's rifle barked once, shattering a lantern near the ceiling. Glass exploded, plunging the room into half-darkness. Miller fired back, the bullet grazing Ryan's shoulder in a hot flash of pain. Ryan dropped behind a crate, breathing hard. Emily called out, "Behind you!" as one of Miller's men rushed from the shadows. Ryan pivoted, striking the man across the face with the rifle stock, then turned the barrel and fired. The echo slammed through the warehouse, and the man crumpled. Max burst through the doorway, muzzle flecked with snow, teeth bared. He lunged at Miller, who sidestepped, firing again. The bullet ricocheted off a crate, splintering wood. Miller cursed, backing toward Emily. "Stop!" Ryan shouted, stepping into the open. His breath steamed in the air. "It's over, Grant. Don't make this worse." Miller's laugh was hollow. "You think you're the hero here? You cost me my life, Walker. Now I'm taking yours." He raised the gun. Time slowed. Ryan saw Miller's finger tighten on the trigger, and Max move. The dog launched forward, a blur of motion, slamming into Miller's chest before the shot could land. They crashed to the ground, struggling in a whirl of fur and snow and shouting. Miller's gun went off once, the bullet slicing past Ryan's shoulder. Then Max's jaws clamped down on Miller's wrist, wrenching the weapon away. Ryan surged forward, kicking the gun aside and slamming Miller down with the full force of his weight. For a moment, neither moved. Ryan's breath came in ragged bursts, pain throbbing through his shoulder. He stared down at the man beneath him, the same cold eyes, the same arrogance, but this time there was fear behind them. "It's over," Ryan said again, voice low. Miller spat blood, sneering. "You don't have the guts." Ryan pressed his forearm against Miller's throat. "You're right, I'm not that man anymore." Then he struck, just hard enough to knock him unconscious. The warehouse fell quiet except for the sound of wind moaning through the cracks. Ryan turned to Emily. She was trembling but alive. He knelt, cutting the ropes around her wrists. "You okay?" She looked at him, her lips trembling but eyes bright. "You came back." "Didn't plan on leaving you behind," he said softly. Max padded over, tail low but wagging. Emily reached out, her fingers brushing his head. "Good boy," she whispered. The dog leaned into her touch, amber eyes softening. Outside, faint sirens began to wail in the distance. Sarah must have picked up the emergency beacon Ryan had managed to trigger during the fight. He exhaled, shoulders finally relaxing. When Sarah arrived 30 minutes later with the rescue team, she found Ryan sitting on the snow-covered steps, one arm in a makeshift sling, Max lying beside him with his head on Ryan's knee. Emily stood nearby, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sunrise bleed faint gold across the valley. Sarah crouched next to Ryan. "You look like hell," she said gently, half smiling. Ryan's laugh was hoarse. "Feels about right." "You did good, Walker," she said, her gaze shifting to Max. "Both of you." Ryan looked down at his partner, who blinked up at him, fur matted with snow, but eyes burning with quiet fire. Couldn't have done it without him. For a moment none of them spoke. The wind eased, carrying the scent of pine and freedom. The nightmare had ended, not cleanly, not perfectly, but it had ended. Emily walked closer, her voice soft. "What now?" Ryan watched the horizon where the light broke through the clouds. "Now?" He smiled faintly. "We go home." And as the sun rose higher, its warmth barely touching the frost, Max lifted his head, tail thumping once against the snow, as if agreeing that home wasn't a place. It was a bond that had survived the storm. 3 weeks after the storm, Wind River looked reborn. The snow that once buried every path had melted into soft streams that ran between the pines, whispering secrets to the soil. The air smelled of thaw and cedar, and the morning sunlight shimmered against wet moss and silver bark. Life was returning, and for the first time in years, so was peace. Ryan Walker stood outside the ranger outpost with his jacket unzipped, the cold no longer biting but brisk and alive. His shoulder was still bandaged, though the doctor, a short, kind man named Dr. Harold Lewis, gray-haired and perpetually amused, had insisted it would heal cleanly. "You've had worse, Walker," the old medic had said when removing the stitches 2 days ago. "But try not to play hero for a month, will you?" Harold, once an Army field surgeon who had lost his son to the same war that had scarred Ryan, had the wry tenderness of someone who knew the limits of bravery. He was shorter than Ryan, balding, with a round face that carried permanent smile lines. Yet behind his humor was quiet grief, the kind that made him gentle with every patient, animal, or human alike. Now Ryan stretched his arm cautiously and winced. Max, lying nearby with his head on his paws, lifted one ear, watching with the same steady intelligence that had saved them both. His wound had healed faster, the fur along his flank already growing back. The dog's posture was relaxed, but his eyes never fully softened. They were still alert, always scanning the tree line. Inside the cabin, Emily Brooks was hunched over a stack of survey papers, sunlight catching the copper strands in her hair. Her cheeks had regained color, and though she still moved carefully, her ribs bruised from the capture, there was purpose in every gesture. She wore a forest ranger's borrowed flannel over her sweater, sleeves rolled to her elbows, a pencil tucked behind one ear. Ryan stepped inside, the door creaking. "You've been up since dawn again," he said. Emily looked up, smiling faintly. "Habit. The snowmelt's changing the river's flow. If we want to stop another slide this spring, we'll have to reinforce the eastern ridge." He leaned against the doorway. "You planning to rebuild the whole forest by yourself?" "Someone has to start," she replied simply, her tone half teasing, half resolute. She tapped the papers. "Besides, it's quieter here. The city doesn't feel right anymore." Ryan understood that unspoken thing behind her words, the same restlessness that drove him to the wilderness. Survival changes the way silence feels. After you face death, the noise of normal life becomes unbearable. He poured 2 cups of coffee from the stove, handing one to her. "You sure about staying, Emily? Winter's not kind up here." She looked at him over the mug's rim. "Neither is running away." He almost smiled. "Guess that makes 2 of us." A soft bark interrupted the moment. Max stood by the door, tail swishing once, the leash in his mouth. Emily laughed. "He's punctual." Ryan took the leash and knelt, scratching the dog's head. "All right, buddy, let's check the ridge." Outside, the forest glimmered under the low morning sun. They walked the old trail that wound through birches and up toward the overlook. Each step left damp prints on the thawing earth. The radio at Ryan's belt buzzed occasionally, check-ins from the other rangers. The smugglers had been rounded up days ago. Grant Miller was in federal custody awaiting trial. Ryan had been asked to testify, and for the first time in years, he'd faced a courtroom not as a suspect, but as a witness of integrity. The government had restored his service record, clearing his name from the incident in Kandahar. A ceremony in Jackson followed, a quiet event where the agency presented him with a plaque and Max with a rescue service medal, a small bronze disc engraved with the K9 insignia. Reporters wanted photographs, but Ryan declined. He stood off to the side while Max sat proudly beside him, amber eyes calm. A silent hero who didn't understand the meaning of medals, but seemed to know their weight. Now, as they reached the ridge, Ryan stopped to look over the valley. The sun broke fully then, scattering golden light across the forest, glinting on the half-frozen river. Birds were returning, faint flutters of color among the branches. Max sat beside him, ears twitching in the breeze. Ryan knelt, resting a hand on the dog's back. "You remember this spot?" he asked softly. "We started here, ended here too." The dog tilted his head, and Ryan chuckled. "Yeah, I guess you don't care about poetry." Behind them, Emily was climbing the last stretch, breathless but smiling. "I care about poetry," she said when she reached him, "especially the kind written in footprints." Ryan turned, raising an eyebrow. "That's supposed to mean something." She shrugged. "It means we're still here, after everything." He nodded, letting silence fill the space between them. Down in the valley, the last remnants of snow gleamed like silver scars, fading reminders of the storm they'd survived. A faint crunch of snow behind them announced another figure. Sarah Callahan emerged from the trees, her auburn braid swinging over her shoulder, cheeks flushed from the climb. She carried a thermos in one hand and a stack of folders in the other. "I figured I'd find you up here," she said, smirking. "You're about as predictable as the sunrise, Walker." Ryan smiled faintly. "Didn't think you'd still be chasing paperwork." "Someone has to make sure heroes file their reports," Sarah said, handing him a folder. "And before you ask, no, you can't skip this part." Her voice held its usual mix of authority and warmth. There was something about her, an unspoken steadiness, that had grounded Ryan during his darker months. She had her own scars, he knew. Losing her husband on a rescue mission had made her both fierce and protective of her team. She didn't show it often, but every time she looked at Max, there was softness in her eyes, the kind reserved for something that restores faith and loyalty. "I heard about the medal," she added. "Max deserves it. You too." Ryan glanced down at the dog, who yawned, unimpressed. "He's just in it for the snacks." Sarah laughed quietly, then turned serious. "You're staying, right? The forest could use someone who actually gives a damn." Ryan met her gaze, then looked out at the mountains. "Yeah," he said after a long pause. "I think we'll stay." When Sarah left, the three, Ryan, Emily, and Max, lingered at the ridge as the wind softened. Emily knelt to tie a red bandana around Max's neck, the same one she'd worn during the rescue. "A reminder," she said, "that even the worst storms end." Ryan watched them, a faint smile playing at his lips. For the first time in years, his chest felt light. No guilt, no ghosts, just the steady rhythm of life returning. He took a deep breath. "Come on, partner," he said to Max, his voice low but certain. "Let's get to work." The dog barked once, sharp and bright, echoing through the trees. Then he bounded ahead down the trail, snow scattering under his paws, the red cloth flickering like a flag in the light. Emily followed, laughter carried by the wind. Ryan lingered one last moment, watching the sun crest above the pines. The warmth brushed his face, and he whispered almost to himself, we made it. And as he descended after them, the forest stirred to life again. The whisper of leaves, the faint trickle of water, and the steady sound of footsteps and paws side by side, marking the beginning of a new dawn. In the end, a new dawn isn't just about survival. It's about redemption, trust, and learning to stand again when life breaks you down. Ryan found his peace not by forgetting the past, but by facing it. Max, his loyal K9 partner, reminded him, and all of us, that loyalty isn't measured in medals, but in moments when we choose love over fear, courage over surrender. We all face our own storms, the kind no one else sees, but like Ryan and Max, we can rebuild, step by step, day by day, because even after the coldest winter, the sun always finds its way back through the trees. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment about what this story meant to you, and tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join our community for more stories of courage, loyalty, and second chances.